All right.
All right, last album.
All right, last album. So we're doing Pavement here with Slanted and Enchanted. In the opening montage, you heard a clip from Summer Babe. Now you're going to hear a clip from Here.
And all the sterile striking into fence, an empty dock you cast away. And rain upon the forehead where the mists are higher if it's just too clear.
Okay, so Slanted and Enchanted by Pavement comes in at number 42 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 3 in 1992, number 211 of all time. It's Pavement's second highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, behind 1994's Crooked Rain, Crooked Rain. It also made Rolling Stone's list, coming in at number 199, and Pavement is ranked number 105 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums. So like I said, this is the first time we're covering them. This is their debut album. Out of a total of, they have a total of 5 albums, but I believe they also have 9 EPs. So that's that. It was Slanted and Enchanted was released on April 20th, 1992. And the genres of Pavement include indie rock, lo-fi, noise pop, and alternative rock. Artists that influenced them include the Pixies, Sonic Youth, Dinosaur Jr., Pere Ubu, Television, The Feelies, Wire, The Fall, R.E.M., Captain Beefheart, Slint, and the Velvet Underground. Artists that they are seen to be similar as include Sebadoh, Beck, Liz Phair, Yo La Tengo, Meat Puppets, and Guided by Voices. And they've influenced a ton of bands, some of which include Built to Spill, Mogwai, Spoon, Josh's favorite, Dismemberment Plan, Weezer, Modest Mouse, Beta Band, Blur, Neutral Milk Hotel, and The Shins. Their highest charted album is 1997's Brighten the Corners, which reached number 70 on the U.S. charts. And their highest charting single is 1994's Cut Your Hair, which actually reached number 10 in the U.S. So very unlike Pavement to hit that high in the charts, but Cut Your Hair definitely did that. I did watch a documentary on this band as well. It's on YouTube. It's called Slow Century. Probably wasn't as good as the one on Jawbreaker, but it was still interesting enough. You can see Stephen Malkmus, lead singer of Pavement and kind of leader of the band. He's interviewed in a sauna, which is different place in a sauna, wearing a towel, just talking about Pavement in a sauna. So there you go. I have a couple of quotes here because I came across a couple of things that I thought were pretty well put together. And so All Music describes them when you pull up Pavement, because trying to describe their sound, I think they did a good job of just describing the band, which is Pavement is perhaps the defining American indie rock band of the 1990s, the group that captured the slacker zeitgeist of the alt-rock era. Standing detached from the tumult of grunge, Pavement seemed laconic, sometimes lazy, as they threaded their love of underground American rock and British post-punk, dressing their winding melodies with squalls of feedback and shambolic rhythms. So I thought that was a good... And also Robert Christgau, famed music critic for many decades, called Pavement the finest rock band of the 90s. So high praise from him. The group was formed in Stockton, California in 1989 by childhood friends, guitarist and vocalist Stephen Malkmus and Scott Canberg. And they did release 3 EPs before this record with a drummer by the name of Gary Young. Gary Young became their drummer because he had like his own studio, and that's where they recorded their EPs, and then he played drums, and so they were like, why don't you just join the band? So he became their drummer. He was also 13 years older than the other members, and sadly he actually passed away last year at the age of 70, I believe. So in the early years...
Sorry, Matt. Who was the other band that we talked about that an older member? Was that the Descendants? Like somebody who was quite older than everyone else?
You got it.
Yeah.
The Police did too, right? Wasn't Andy Summers like 10 years older than...
He was a decade, older.
Yeah. So we've had a couple of those. So in the early years of Pavement, they did draw comparisons to The Fall. And I saw this quote by The Fall's Mark E. Smith claimed that Pavement were a ripoff and that they, quote, did not have an original idea in their heads. So he was not a fan.
Like my review of The Fall.
Other CTS band that we covered, The Wedding Present, covered a early Pavement song called Box Elder. And but because Pavement was not really well known, many people for a while thought that Pavement's version was a cover, when in fact it was The Wedding Present who were covering them. So there you go. So this record was actually recorded from December of 1990 through January of 1991, and basically circulated for over a year by cassette tape, and so just was not being put out by any label before it was being released commercially at all. So between the time that they actually recorded the record and they released it, they did have other members join the band, and that included Bob Nastanovich, who was Stephen Malkmus's friend from college. They went to University of Virginia together, and Nastanovich was a percussionist in the band, and a guy by the name of Mark Eibold, who played bass. He was just a fan of Pavement. He would go to shows and he would hang out with the band, and he could play the bass, and so they eventually brought him on as a bass player. So there was a couple other bands that Malkmus started with Nastanovich. They were in a band called Ectoslavia, excuse me, with James McNew, and McNew actually later on went on to join Yo La Tango. So there was a small time that they were involved in a band together. And Nastanovich and Malkmus also formed another band called the Silver Jews around the same time. So they were kind of dipping their toes in other bands. Stephen Malkmus has been quoted as saying that Slanted and Enchanted is probably the best record we made, only because it's less self-conscious and has an unrepeatable energy about it. And then we're going to cover them a couple more times, so I'm basically stopping here. But I did like this quote. I read an article that Chuck Klosterman wrote, gave an interviewed Stephen Malkmus for GQ magazine, and they were talking about how after band broke up, like, people didn't really keep in touch with Stephen Malkmus. And I guess Stephen Malkmus, one of the things you learn in this article is that he is a huge fantasy sports fan. So he has all these fantasy sports leagues, and Nastanovich has this quote saying, Stephen is actually pretty difficult, is a pretty difficult guy to get access. If you're not in the same town with him, you don't really hear from him. I found that the easiest way to get in touch with him, even if it's about a pavement-related issue, is to propose a trade in one of our fantasy leagues and attach my question in an email memo. So that made me laugh. You want to get his attention, you got to make a trade in fantasy sports. So there you go. So I've talked about Pavement many times with John before, but Josh, I don't think you had much of a background on them, so I'm curious to hear your take first on this. What'd you think of Slanted and Enchanted?
Yeah, I'm very interested to talk about this album with you guys, because what I know of Pavement is exactly what you quoted. They're like the 90s band. They're like the Gen X band. That's like all I ever heard, and I never went and listened to them, or if I did, I don't remember. But because of this show, Combing the Stacks, I see the lineage of Pavement in all the bands that we've talked about. Like, there was like a million bands that came up when I was listening to this, starting with Velvet Underground and going from there. Once again, another band influenced by the Velvet Underground. And the thing about Pavement is, too, I see forward to all the bands that that influenced so many bands that I liked. I think I can see going back to Pavement, like Weezer later on this decade, and you name anything you named in the influences were like bands that I thought of. So I'm not going to like repeat them, but even his singing, Malkmus's singing, just reminds me of like Modest Mouse and like the direction that they did. Like, you don't have to have a traditionally good voice to have a band. This album is lo-fi sounding on purpose. There's either off-tuned guitars or minor, like, alternative tunings, as we've, I think, said with like Sonic Youth. There's feedback and distortion. All of this stuff we have like discovered along the way in the 80s into the 90s. They are short songs. They are pop influenced, I feel like, ultimately, and I feel about this album the way I felt about Dinosaur Jr. and some of the other bands. I like it. I thought it was great. It wasn't what I expected. It wasn't what the reputation or kind of like what I remember John saying in the past about this band. And I feel like the DNA is something that I really vibe with. There is kind of, I can get why maybe like the lo-fi sound is too much, or they're just kind of seem a little shoddy or a little amateurish on this album in terms of sound, or maybe almost like they're trying to sound bad on purpose or something. But I feel like ultimately they're rooted in making like pop songs, or have that foundation of their interests, and they're building the rock music around that. And it's kind of hard. I guess what I'm trying to say is they're like so much of a lodestone for later bands. It's hard for me to separate them from future bands in some way. It's like I can't not hear other bands. Like that's how kind of seemingly important this band seems in the musical landscape. So yeah, I liked it. I consider me like a neophyte to this band. I thought it was impressive. It just kind of, not great singing, but there's good guitar. It's discordant, but not in a way that I don't like we've talked about before. And there's some weird sounds on here, like on Jackal's False Grails. There's some sort of, I don't know if it's a guitar. I couldn't figure out what it was. It's like a weird synth or guitar sound or something that repeats. That's pretty good. And they just do all these little things, and the songs are like 3 minutes or less for the most part, and it's like get in, get out, and kind of offbeat rock and roll, college rock, and I'm here for it. So thumbs up.
Yeah, I mean, as you could probably tell by the fact that Matt and Josh have brought it up in no uncertain terms, I have an interesting relationship with the band Pavement. Yes, I think that when I first came to Pavement, it was because there was breathless press about this band. I mean, if you were to read about Pavement in the 90s and you picked up any Spin or NME or any of these, it was Robert Christgau. This is just revolutionary.
They're like the hipster band.
And I remember listening to this, and like the first time. And let me start by saying I've never hated Pavement. In fact, there's a lot of things about it that I like. So I am not anti-Pavement. But I remember thinking, and at this time, I didn't have anywhere near the palette I have now, as Josh said, on Communist Text. But I had some. Yeah. And my first ever take, age 13, listening to Pavement, is like, oh, so this is like if you start trying to play like Sonic Youth, but like you just stop, and just give up on playing like it, and then move to the next thing, and like all the things, and they clearly are influenced, as one of their influences, Sonic Youth, because there's elements of the down tuning and stuff that clearly hits my ear. I'm like, okay, I like some of what this is. But it just never develops. And what I love about Sonic Youth is you're seeing the progression of it, and it builds, and even their short burst songs like Mildred Pierce, right, just hit you and explode, right? So it's like, okay, there's that. And then, of course, at around the same time, you're starting to pick up like, something like, In the Mouth of Desert sounds like an early Weezer song, right? Before Weezer. But Weezer's just like, all right, well, let's give it some pop polish, right? Yep. With a little bit of metal. And it's like, they finished the lead too, right? So, I mean, they are so Gen X-y because it's just, Malcolmus is lazy kind of as a singer, which is the knock on him a little bit. Yeah. It's fine, but it doesn't pop. But then it's like, all right, now I have more to go off of. And you mentioned The Fall, right? Which I start writing down, okay, where is it there? But to me, there is a clear comparative album for this, and that is Pink Flag by Wire. Mm-hmm. And Pink Flag by Wire does much of what this does, a bunch of fragments of songs to some degree that have sort of different leads playing around. I connected more with Pink Flag by Wire. Very Freudian slip there. Pink Flag by Wire. And I'm like, well, yeah, this band was clearly influenced by Wire, the noise rock of like a Dinosaur Jr., which you mentioned for sure. Yep. Mm-hmm. Sonic Youth for sure. Those were you mentioned some of like the art rock we covered in the early 80s for sure. You could hear elements of that Pere Ubu, right? You mentioned, that for sure. I heard all of that. I think for me, I want to go back to this. I enjoyed this album. In fact, I'd give this a thumbs up. But I will never get the breathless #1 album of the year, every album that came out connection, because I do feel like it's like They are not reinventing the wheel, and I can drag out
Yes, I agree.
lots of stuff that we've covered, I think is a better version of what this is. And I like what this does in a different template. And it's just hard for me not to compare it to somebody like Sonic Youth. And I know Matt is going to follow me, and Matt's going to talk about why he likes this much better than what Sonic Youth does. And it's going to hit him like the converse of what, it is for me. So we're like going to be like a direct contrast in terms of that. But really, I think if you're going to do this type of art rock or experimental rock, I need a little bit more vibrancy and art in it, as opposed to like the Slacker ethos a little bit. So it's a weird one for me, and that it's a thumbs up, but also I always am to some degree baffled by Pavement. And that's why I kind of like half jokingly shit on them to Matt in particular all the time. It's like, all right, we're going to cover like every Pavement album, of course, because every fucking critic loves, Pavement. And then, of course, they also love Neutral Milk Hotel because they follow
they only had
lineage,
one
right?
album. So.
And unlike the other critical darlings of the 90s, who like I listen to it, I'm like, I get why they love PJ Harvey, you know what I mean? Or like the bands you'd see like that would come up all the time. It's like, I get that. Pavement was always the one where it's like, I get it, but also like, huh. Like, and my only take is it's like the rock critic thing where it's like, they look like us and we maybe could be them. And like, it's the whole thing. Like, we can't be Kiss, right? But we can be, Pavement. So I think they get a little halo effect of that. So, yeah. So
I think,
thumbs
that's a
up,
totally,
but also with a snark. Yeah.
I think that's a totally accurate and appropriate review. I'm in agreement with you on that. Yeah.
There we go.
I commend you, John, because earlier this week, Josh texted me. He goes, I don't get why John doesn't like Pavement. It seems like it has all the stuff that he likes. And I'm like, I'm not sure either, but I think you did a really good job of kind of parsing out like the different things and like why. So, and it makes sense. And it does also line in with your personality that like,
there's a little shit post of my hatred of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, the times that you shit on them, it's more because of like, it's like a little bit of backlash because you are sick of hearing about how everybody just being like, how amazing. And you're like, slow your roll. They're good. But like, other people. So that all makes sense. Right. But yeah, you're right. I would much rather listen to this than most of the Sonic Youth stuff that we covered, right? And I think
but
this
do you
is
recognize it as descendants of Sonic Youth?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. No, for sure. And also the Pixies. We haven't brought there's a very Pixies element to this. So you're right,
Pixies
and that's
are superior to this band.
Yes, I agree.
Sure.
I think the Pixies. I would rather listen to the Pixies albums we covered are better than this. For me, And you're right in the sense that it's not really reinventing the wheel, but there's something about it's like one of those artists, and it's weird to say this about them because they were never on a major label. They never really sold albums. They were not like commercially successful. But like there was something about them, the way that when they hit, how they hit, and with who they hit, that early 90s, right? So this is 92. Their last album, Terror Twilight, was 99, so they are like right in the 90s, just about a decade, like 8 years together, or really a decade together, but 8 years of albums. But they just fell in line, and they became like one of like the Velvet Underground of their time, really, right? But as well as the Pixies did, but the Pixies were just earlier than them. But this was like a quintessential 90s album or band because of just the fact that they were pretty much existed in the 90s. To me, they do a great job of scratching that itch of being like discordant and off and weird and like what's going on. But there's also embedded at the core of it is melody, right? It's one of those things where, because I didn't know this record terribly well. The only Pavement album that I felt like that I really know is Crooked Rain. That's the only one that I ever owned. So I can't really say that I came into this knowing really any of these songs. I have never been a huge Pavement fan, but I've been curious about them and I've enjoyed them. I have friends from college that love Pavement. They're definitely in that crowd that you're talking about. That's just like, this is one of the greatest bands ever. I'm not quite there. I do like them quite a bit.
They say things like, I don't get why people love like REM. Like
no, they're not. No,
Pavement fan take. Yeah.
No, that not at all.
Okay, good.
So but so yeah, to me, it's one of those things that we talk about, like on artists like the Talking Heads, where they kind of do this weird avant-garde arty kind of thing, but then they cushion it they couch it in with this melody, these hooks, these beats or whatever, that center me, right? It's a grounding force in listening to what otherwise would be rather chaotic music. And so when you compare this to something like a Pere Ubu, right, or a Wedding Present, or yes, for me, a lot of times Sonic Youth, where they're lacking that, right? They're lacking that, and that's a big barrier for me for Sonic Youth. You're right, John, that Sonic Youth is definitely having more songs that go longer than 2, 3, 4 minutes. And they develop and they're doing different things. This isn't really doing that. This is kind of getting in, getting out. But
there's a certain repetition to what they do too that I feel is in contrast to, where they kind of keep hammering the same note and coming back to it a little bit. I feel
Pavement or Sonic Youth.
Pavement.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. And Malcolmus's voice is not it's not a good voice. And the lazy slacker, it's very Gen X, right? It's kind of like falling under that category as well. And they probably also made people feel like, I can't sing and I can't play an instrument either. but I could start a band. And I think actually Malcolm has said in one of the interviews in the documentary that I watched, said something like, you don't need to play your guitar well to be in a good band. And he's like, and I know that, right? Like, and he's like a point. He's proud of that fact, right? That there's no virtuoso guitar playing here, but it's virtuoso in the sense that like they're taking something and kind of, perfecting it, really.
You're understanding music enough and like structure.
And they're deconstructing it to an extent, and they're purposefully down tuning and they're experimenting with different sounds and like, let me throw in this little, and they're doing it not just for the sake of being different and weird, but also because like it's just part of their signature, and it's part of what kind of gives them their sound, and they can still couch it within something that's very pleasant or listenable, and so yeah,
especially here they kind of like they're like, yeah, we can kind of write a song that's pretty and has profound lyrics and goes to 3 minutes and 56 seconds, and here's what that would sound like, and it's pretty fucking good, and now we're just not gonna fucking do it anymore. Like, and I respect sort of a little bit of like the ethos, because I have a little bit of that in me myself, but it is a little bit of like, we don't really know how to play the good. It's like, you fucking clearly do, asshole.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you can write, like, you can't write a song like Here, you know what I mean, without an understanding of melody and like really fucking good lyrics, because it has great lyrics. And of course, he's always like, oh, my songs don't mean it. It's like, you're so full of shit. So that's a little bit of my argument. Whereas like a Sonic Youth, right? They're up their own ass too, but they're not like up their own ass like that. You know what I mean? It's like, no, it's important for us to explore musical horizons, and even
and that's
wider,
the thing,
right? Like, we're an art rock project, and like we might not be a band totally, but the art, whereas this is for like skateboards, and we write songs about skateboards and nothing, and it's like, not always. Come on, dude. Like,
but you get the sense with Malcolmus, and even that Clusterman article, he's like, you can't really figure out what's going on, because he's like, nobody really knows why Pavement broke up, like it just kind of just happened, and people and all the other members of Pavement,
or just a dude, like,
it's not,
some people's
he just doesn't give much. He just doesn't give much, right? They broke up because he wanted the band to break up, right? And he was basically the band in a lot of ways. Everybody else in interviews is like, we would totally be back together. We'd be making more records, and he doesn't really give answers. He's just like,
he's just not that invested or cares that much, it sounds like.
Yeah,
but I don't believe that. I think that's like very Gen X. Like, I don't give a fuck, but also like, I am making an effort to not give a fuck. You know what I mean? And that's a little bit of what I've always. It's like, I'm not totally certain he doesn't give a fuck. You know what I mean? It's kind of like,
right.
Well, we'll never know.
Yeah, he's not going to tell you.
But I just think that type of mystery is a big fucking thing for critics too, which is what really draws them to it.
Yeah, could be. Yeah,
as opposed to like being like Morrissey. Right, where it's like, what the fuck, this is a lot. It's a lot to be. But he's equally like, I don't give a fuck. Well, clearly giving a fuck. So,
But as far as this album specifically goes, I did enjoy it. I like I said, I didn't really know any of these songs. I think it starts off really strong. I love Summer Babe. I think that's a great opening song. And it just goes from there. I do like it's like got some variety in there. Some of it's just like him screaming, like, what is it? No life singed her. He's just like, ah! It starts off with that. So it's got like that discordant stuff, but it's got, like John said, Here is a really pretty song. Like, it's like, that's probably maybe the most straightforward.
It's like very Velvet Underground too.
Yeah.
Very Underground.
Good point. Yeah. I love Jackal's False Grails, The Lonesome Arrow. That was that was more of a instrumental. There's some lyrics there, but not many. But there's a cool groove going on there. So at the end of the day, it's a very interesting record that goes in different directions, and it gets better the more you listen to it, right? Because the first time you listen to this is definitely not something you listen to just once and you can make an opinion on it. I mean, I guess you could, but like, it's, to me, this is a grower. This is where you're gonna initially be put off by what's happening because of the discordant nature of a lot of stuff and the awkward, like, where'd that come from? Just throwing in weird stuff and whatever. But there's actually there's like a method to it. There's a reason behind it. And the more I listen to music like this and more I listen to Pavement, the more I'm able to see it, and I end up liking them the more I listen to them. So yeah, thumbs up. I'm glad we got to this. I've heard of this album for many, many years. I just never really listened to it, and I'm glad we got around to it this time. So yeah, thumbs up for me.
I'll also throw a shout out to tracks 11 through 13, Perfume V, Flamethrowers, and Jackals, and False Grails. That's when they kind of they start doing the beginning of a lot of like what Sonic Youth does, and I really like those. It's very discordant and drawn out, and I kind of described it as like the first 2 minutes and 10 seconds or 3 minutes of what would eventually be like a 6-minute version if like Sonic Youth was doing it. And that's where I most connected with them, because it's like, ooh, this is some interesting choices in terms of how they laid this out. After all of that, there's a lot about this sound, as you guys mentioned, that I do like. And that's why, even with me doing all of that, it's still a thumbs up. And I enjoyed this. And I was laughing. I was like, they're going to be surprised that I'm going to like this out. But they really shouldn't. They really shouldn't be, because there's nothing in every take I've taken that wouldn't lead you to believe that I wouldn't like. And I can
it's not your takes. It's just like the history of knowing you for so many years. And anytime Pavement comes up, it's you like shitting on them. So that's more but without you ever really going into detail that I can recall anyway as to why, the way that you just did. So that is helpful.
And I shit on Pink Floyd a lot, and yet I went back later. I'm like, they're not quite as bad as I thought.
Yeah.
There's
well, you just have a more nuanced take now. My final thoughts. I like Two States. I thought that was a fun track. I mean, we basically name checked almost every song on here, and I would not appreciate this band as much if we hadn't done the work on the show and listened to all these other albums that came before them. I think that's ultimately my final appreciation post for this.
And this is another one of those albums, like every song sounds like another band. So like Two States sounds like a Fugazi song. So it's like each one of like what band are they this one, that we've covered so far. So yeah. Okay.